The galaxy was old, much older than anyone could remember. 47 different alien species lived together in peace, trading goods and sharing knowledge across thousands of star systems. They had councils where leaders met to solve problems. They had trade routes that connected distant worlds. They had rules that everyone followed to keep the peace. But there was one place that nobody talked about. One area of space that every species avoided. It was marked on all the star maps with warning signs. Ships would go around it even if it meant traveling much farther. Traders would refuse cargo that required them to go near it. Military commanders would plan routes that kept their fleets far away from its borders. That place was human space. Commander Vrelk stood in front of the Galactic Council, his 4 eyes scanning the enormous room. He was a Thaxian, a proud warrior from an empire that had conquered 17 star systems in the last 100 years. The Thaxians were strong, their weapons were powerful, and they feared nothing. Or so they believed. Vrelk's mandibles clicked together as he spoke. A small device on his chest translated his words into the common language. He said that the humans had resources his empire needed. Minerals, strategic locations, technology. He said the council had become weak and afraid. He said it was time to stop treating human space like it was forbidden. An old ambassador named Quilix raised her serpent-like head. Her purple scales caught the light as she moved. She was a Zorath, a species known for their wisdom and long memory. She told Vrelk that he was young, that he did not remember what they called the silence. Vrelk dismissed her words. He said the silence was just a myth, old stories meant to scare children and keep warriors from being brave. Quilix hissed softly, a sound that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably. She explained that 300 cycles ago, the Korthian Dominion had sent 5,000 warships into human territory. It was the largest military fleet anyone had ever assembled. The Korthians wanted Earth's water-rich planets. They thought humans were primitive and weak, easy to defeat and conquer. The entire fleet vanished. No distress signals were ever received. No wreckage was ever found. No survivors ever returned home. There was just silence, empty and complete. Vrelk clicked his mandibles in frustration. He argued that one incident from centuries ago should not control what they did today. The galaxy had changed. Technology had advanced. Perhaps the Korthians had simply been unprepared. Another counselor spoke up, his voice like rocks grinding together. He was Druvian, a species that looked like they were carved from stone. He said there had been other incidents. The Mexlar sovereignty sent scouts into human space. They disappeared. The Yilix Collective tried to make peaceful contact, but when the humans refused, they sent warships to force negotiations. Those ships disappeared too. Every species that crossed into human territory with weapons and bad intentions simply ceased to exist. Vrelk suggested that perhaps those species had been weak. The Thaxian Empire was not weak. The Thaxian Empire had never been defeated in battle. The council chamber became very quiet. Finally, the High Arbiter spoke. His name was Xenox, and he was a being made of living crystal. His thoughts showed as colored lights that pulsed through his transparent body. He said that if Vrelk wanted to test the human boundary, the council would not stop him. But they would also not help him. Humanity had never attacked any council member. Humans had never threatened anyone's territory or demanded tribute. They kept to themselves. Perhaps everyone should respect that arrangement. Vrelk bowed stiffly. He said the Thaxian Empire would proceed alone. He would show the galaxy that humans were not the monsters everyone feared. Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard the Earth defense vessel Reliant. His fingers drummed on the armrest as he watched the main view screen showing empty space. It was routine patrol duty along the outer markers of human territory. His crew of 40 people moved through their tasks with practiced ease. They had done this patrol 100 times before. Lieutenant Kelly Barnes sat at the sensor station, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was good at her job, one of the best sensor operators in the fleet. Her green eyes suddenly went wide as she studied her displays. She called out to the captain, telling him they were picking up unusual readings at marker beacon 73. Multiple ships were showing up on sensors. Large ships, military configurations. They were arranging themselves in attack formations. Jake stood up and walked closer to the view screen. He asked how many ships. Kelly's fingers moved quickly across her console. She counted at least 200 vessels, possibly more arriving through jump drives. Her voice carried a note of concern as she reported that they were definitely arranging in attack patterns. Jake kept his voice calm, even though his heart was beating faster. He ordered red alert and called all crew to battle stations. He told the communications officer to send out a standard warning on all frequencies. They needed to remind whoever was out there that they were approaching human territory and needed to state their intentions. Paul Grant, the communications officer, was a stocky man with dark skin. He worked his console efficiently, sending the warning in multiple alien languages. They waited. The alien fleet continued to grow. Sensors now counted over 300 ships. Paul looked up and said they were receiving a response. It was audio only and the computer was translating it now. A harsh, clicking voice filled the bridge. It identified itself as Commander Vrelk of the Thaxian Empire. The voice said that human space contained resources the Thaxians required. Humans would surrender designated systems or face annihilation. They had 1 hour to respond. Jake closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. He told Paul to get him a direct line to Earth Command with the highest priority. When the channel opened, Jake spoke clearly. He identified himself and reported the situation. A hostile force of more than 300 vessels was demanding the surrender of human systems. He requested instructions. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice came through the speakers. It was Admiral Lisa Campbell, the commander of all Earth defensive forces. Her voice was clipped and professional. She told the Reliant to maintain position and not to fire unless fired upon. They were implementing something called Protocol Sentinel. Help was on the way. Jake acknowledged the orders. He turned to his crew and told them what they had all heard. They would hold position and wait. He ordered weapons to be charged and shields raised to maximum strength, but they would not fire first. Kelly reported that the alien fleet was advancing. They had crossed the boundary marker. They were now inside human space. Jake noted the information. He told his weapons officer to keep all systems hot but not to fire. They would not be the ones to start this fight. The Thaxian ships moved forward in perfect military formation. Their hulls were covered with weapon systems. On the view screen, they appeared as bright dots against the darkness, growing larger with each passing second. Kelly's voice rose slightly as she spoke. She was detecting multiple jump signatures behind the Thaxian fleet. A lot of them. Many ships were appearing. Jake ordered her to identify the new contacts. Kelly's fingers flew across her console. She reported Earth Defense Forces. Capital ships were jumping in. The Valiant, the Defender, the Guardian, and at least 50 more major warships. She paused, her eyes going wide again. More were arriving. The entire defense fleet was showing up. Jake allowed himself a small smile. He said it looked like Earth Command had decided to roll out the welcome wagon. Commander Vrelk watched his tactical display with satisfaction. The single human ship ahead of his fleet had not moved. They had not fired their weapons. They were clearly paralyzed with fear, exactly as he had predicted. Behind him on the bridge, his crew worked their stations with military precision. Everything was going according to plan. His sensor officer spoke up. He reported that they were detecting new contacts. Multiple capital ships were appearing behind the Thaxian formation. Vrelk's mandibles clicked in annoyance. He asked how many. The sensor officer scanned his displays. 50 ships. No, 70? The number was still increasing. He reported that they were now reading over 200 human vessels. Vrelk said that was impossible. Intelligence reports had suggested that humans possessed perhaps 50 capital ships total. That was one of the reasons he had been confident in this invasion. The sensor officer insisted his readings were accurate. The humans were surrounding the Thaxian fleet. They were forming a sphere around Vrelk's ships, cutting off all escape routes. Vrelk studied his tactical display. The human ships had appeared from nowhere. Their jump technology was obviously more advanced than the Council had known. The formation they were using was sophisticated, the kind of maneuver that required excellent coordination and practice. Vrelk ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the lead human vessel. When the channel was open, Vrelk spoke clearly. He identified himself and told the humans they were outnumbered and outgunned. They should stand down immediately, a human voice responded. It was male and disturbingly calm. The voice identified itself as Admiral Richard Hayes of Earth Defense Command. He said that Vrelk had entered human space with hostile intent and had made demands for surrender. This was the only opportunity to withdraw peacefully. The human weapons were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. They did not just fire randomly or spray energy across space hoping to hit something. Each shot was calculated, precise, aimed at specific targets with mathematical accuracy. Railguns launched solid projectiles at incredible speeds. These were not normal bullets. They were dense metal rods that punched through Thaxian shields like the shields were not even there. The projectiles hit engines, weapon systems, power cores, never the crew quarters, never the life support systems. Always the military capabilities, directed energy weapons carved through space in brilliant beams. But they did not simply burn through hulls. They seemed to understand the molecular structure of what they hit, taking apart ships piece by piece in ways that disabled without destroying. Missiles streaked from the human vessels, but these were not ordinary missiles. They changed direction in mid-flight, dodging defensive fire with movements that seemed almost alive. When they hit their targets, they released cascading explosions that spread through ship systems in carefully controlled patterns. Power went offline, weapons became useless, engines stopped functioning, but life support remained intact. Commander Vrelk watched in horror as his tactical display showed ship after ship going dark. Not exploding, not breaking apart, just going dark, powerless, drifting in space like dead metal shells. The truly terrifying part was not the power of the human weapons. It was the precision. In 7 minutes, every single Thaxian ship was disabled. 300 warships rendered completely helpless, and not one had been destroyed. Not one crew member had died. Vrelk stared at his darkened console. Emergency lights cast red shadows across his bridge. His ship was drifting, all power gone except for basic life support. Every other vessel in his fleet was in the same condition. Admiral Hayes's voice came through the communication system one more time. He said that the Thaxian ships were now the property of Earth Defense Command. The crews would be treated humanely according to something he called the Geneva Conventions and its galactic extensions. They would receive medical care, food, and shelter. Once the Thaxian government contacted Earth to discuss terms, arrangements would be made for their return. But Vrelk needed to understand clearly that he had attacked first. What happened next depended entirely on how the Thaxian Empire chose to respond. Vrelk said nothing. There was nothing he could say. The Admiral continued. He wanted Vrelk to understand something else. They had disabled the entire Thaxian fleet in 7 minutes without destroying a single ship or killing a single crew member. They had done that on purpose, because humans believed in something called proportional response. They could have killed everyone. They chose not to. Vrelk should remember that when he returned home. Remember that humanity had shown mercy when they had every right to show none. The communication ended. Vrelk sat in the darkness, his 4 eyes finally understanding what the rest of the galaxy had known for centuries. No one dared cross into human space for a very good reason, and now he understood why. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Nicole Quinn walked into the Galactic Council chamber. She was a tall woman with silver streaks in her brown hair. Her blue eyes were sharp and missed nothing. Behind her walked Commander Chris Murphy, his military uniform crisp and decorated with colored ribbons showing years of service. This was the first time in 300 years that humanity had sent a representative to the Galactic Council. The massive chamber was designed to be intimidating. Thousands of aliens sat in rising tiers all around, looking down at the single platform in the center where the speaker stood alone. Quinn did not look intimidated at all. She walked to the center platform and looked around at all the eyes, sensors, and optical organs focused on her. She introduced herself and thanked the council for the invitation. She apologized that it had taken such unfortunate circumstances to bring humanity to their table. High Arbiter Xenix, the crystalline being whose thoughts showed as colored lights, pulsed with formal colors. He said the council had many questions about what happened with the Thaxian fleet. Quinn said she was sure they did. She was there to answer those questions as honestly as possible. But first she wanted to address something that she thought was behind all those questions. Why had humanity remained isolated for so long? Why had they avoided galactic society? And why had they responded so forcefully when others crossed into their space? Ambassador Quillix, the Zorath representative, moved forward slightly. She said they would very much like to understand these things. Humanity was something of a mystery to the galaxy. Quinn activated a holographic display above the platform. It showed Earth rotating peacefully in space. She said this was the human homeworld. beautiful, with oceans, continents, forests, and deserts. A paradise, really. But for most of their recorded history, humans had used this paradise as a battlefield. The display changed, showing historical images. Ancient armies with swords and spears, medieval castles under siege, ships firing cannons at each other, trenches filled with soldiers in a terrible war, mushroom clouds rising over cities, showing the terrible power of nuclear weapons. Quinn explained that humans fought constantly, not to survive against external threats, but against each other. Different nations, different beliefs, different ideas about how to live. They developed increasingly sophisticated ways to kill each other. By the time they created nuclear weapons, they had the capacity to make their own planet uninhabitable multiple times over. The council watched in silent fascination and horror. Many had never seen anything like this. Most species had unified before reaching nuclear capability. Humans had pointed those weapons at themselves. Quinn continued. She said something had changed. The display now showed spaceships leaving Earth. Humans looked up beyond their atmosphere and suddenly saw themselves differently. They saw one small blue world in the vastness of space. They realized that all their conflicts, all their hatred, all their violence was directed at the only home they had. They came together, not because they suddenly loved each other, but because they realized they had to. They formed the unified Earth government, not as a perfect society, but as a necessity for survival. Commander Vrelk's voice crackled through the chamber. He was attending remotely from Thaxian space, having been returned home as promised. He said it was a touching story, but it did not explain their military capabilities. Quinn turned toward the audio pickup. She said actually it explained everything. When humans unified, they did not forget how to make weapons. They did not erase their military knowledge. They took everything they had learned from thousands of years of warfare against each other and redirected it. They asked themselves a simple question. If they ever encountered a hostile alien species, how would they defend themselves? The holographic display showed human shipyards, massive facilities constructing vessels in orbit around Earth and other planets. Quinn explained they built a defensive fleet. They developed weapon systems, they created strategic doctrines, and they made a collective decision as a species. They would never ever be the aggressor. They would never attack another species without provocation. But they would also never ever be victims. A counselor observed that humans were warriors. Quinn shook her head. She said no, they were survivors. There was a difference. Warriors sought glory in battle. Survivors did whatever was necessary to ensure their people continued to exist. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, natural disasters, and their own worst impulses. They were very, very good at surviving. Ambassador Quillix raised her head. She said Quinn spoke of defense, yet the response to the Thaxian fleet was overwhelming. They disabled 300 ships in minutes. That suggested preparation for offensive operations, not merely defense. Quinn asked Commander Murphy to address this point. Murphy stepped forward. He was a career military officer who had spent his entire adult life in Earth Defense Command. He explained that humanity did not distinguish between offensive and defensive capabilities, the way others might think. Every weapon system they developed was designed to end conflicts as quickly as possible with minimal loss of life on all sides. Vrelk's voice was sarcastic. Minimal loss of life? They had disabled his entire fleet, Murphy said exactly. Disabled, not destroyed. Every member of the Thaxian crew had survived. Their ships could be repaired. He asked Vrelk to compare that to what would have happened if the Thaxian Empire had defeated that single human patrol ship. Would they have shown the same restraint? The silence that followed was answer enough. Everyone knew the Thaxians would have destroyed the human ship completely. Murphy continued. He said humanity had learned a hard lesson from their own history. Long conflicts caused suffering far beyond the battlefield. Wars dragged on, civilians died, economies collapsed, and hatred built that lasted for generations. So they developed a different approach. When forced to fight, they fought with overwhelming force to end the conflict immediately, but with precision. They targeted military capabilities while preserving lives. Vrelk challenged him. What if they had failed to disable the ships quickly? What if the Thaxians had been more resistant to human weapons? Murphy's answer was blunt. Then they would have escalated. Make no mistake, he said. What the Thaxians experienced was a measured response.